live in Wichita, Kansas, and I work for a small electrical maintenance company that services farms and more remote properties. That day, I had left much later than usual. It was already past 10 p.m. when I finally got on the road back home. It was one of those secondary highways practically unlit, just the reflective lane markings and a few signs here and there. I was already used to that kind of drive, so I wasn't nervous or anything, just tired. The radio was low, playing a slightly static local station, and the air inside the car was cold because I had the AC on to keep myself awake. There was almost no one on the road, which is pretty common around there at that hour. I remember thinking I just wanted to get home, take a quick shower, and go to bed without even checking my phone. It was about a 40-minute drive, and I had done it hundreds of times, so I was basically driving on autopilot, only paying attention to the basics. After about 15 minutes on the road, I glanced at the rearview mirror more out of habit than necessity, and that's when I saw a light coming up behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it, just assumed it was a car that had gotten onto the highway after me. But what caught my attention was that it looked like only one headlight, not two like it normally would be. I even blinked a few times, thinking it might just be my eyes adjusting to the darkness or the distance, but no, it was still a single light. Even so, I didn't worry too much. I figured it could be a motorcycle, even though it was strange for someone to be riding out there that late. I kept driving normally, maintaining my speed, and every now and then I'd take a quick look in the mirror. The light stayed there in the same position, neither closer nor farther away. That's when I started paying a bit more attention to it, not out of fear yet, but with that subtle feeling that something wasn't quite right. I decided to do a simple test, just to confirm whether it was really a motorcycle or maybe a car farther back. I sped up a little, going from about 55 to nearly 70 miles per hour, which was already faster than I usually drove on that road. I kept an eye on the mirror for a few seconds afterward, expecting the light to shrink to get farther away. But it didn't change at all. It stayed exactly in the same spot, like it was locked there behind me. That gave me a strange feeling in my stomach, like when you realize something simple doesn't make sense. I eased off the gas and let the car slow down to around 50. Again, I waited to see the light get closer, which would have been expected, but nothing. Not closer, not farther. It was as if my speed had no effect on it at all. At that point, I started paying real attention. I turned off the radio to eliminate any distraction and just listened to the engine and the wind hitting the car. The road was still completely empty. No streetlights, no visible houses, just dark fields on both sides. I looked at the rearview mirror again, trying to understand better what I was seeing. It didn't look like the shaky light of a motorcycle, nor low like a distant car. It was steady, firm, almost at the same height as regular car headlights, but still just one point. I started thinking of possibilities, maybe a broken headlight or a truck with misaligned lights, but none of those explanations really fit. The strangest part was the consistency. It didn't feel like something was following me the way a normal vehicle would. It was like it was simply there, fixed, independent of what I did. I began to feel uneasy in a way that went beyond curiosity. It was that kind of discomfort that grows without you noticing exactly when it started. My hands tightened a bit on the wheel, and I found myself checking the mirror much more often than before, almost every few seconds. I tried to ignore it for a while, focusing on the road, the reflective lines, the passing signs, but it was impossible not to look back. The light stayed exactly the same. It didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, didn't sway like it normally would with a vehicle moving over slight imperfections in the road. And that started to bother me, because even on a smooth road, there's always some movement. That thing was too still. I wondered if it could be something with my own car, like a weird reflection, but it didn't make sense. When I slightly adjusted the mirror angle, the light was still there, in the same relative position behind me. That's when I decided to do something more direct to clear the doubt. I knew that a few miles ahead there was a dirt side road leading to some farmland. It wasn't somewhere anyone would turn into at that hour without a reason, but it was perfect for testing. As I approached the turn, I was already tense, paying attention to every detail, waiting to see if that light would react in any way. When I turned the wheel and entered the side road, kicking up a bit of dust, the first thing I did was immediately look in the rearview mirror, and the light was simply gone. It didn't get farther away, didn't turn, didn't appear following me onto the same road. It was like it had been switched off. I even slowed down more and watched for a few seconds, trying to see if it would show up again in the distance. But there was nothing. Just complete darkness behind me. I stopped the car for a few seconds on that dirt road, engine still running, trying to process what had just happened. The silence there felt different, heavier, without the constant sound of tires on asphalt. All I could hear was the engine idling and some insects nearby. I stared into the rearview mirror, waiting for any kind of movement, anything that could explain it. Part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe the vehicle had continued straight while I turned, which would make sense. But at the same time, that didn't explain how the light had stayed at the exact same distance for so long before that. And it didn't explain why it looked like only one headlight. Even so, I tried to convince myself that was it. Just someone continuing down the main road. I took a deep breath, ran a hand over my face, and decided to go back to the highway. When I turned the car back onto the asphalt and aligned it with the lane, it took me a couple of seconds to steady the wheel and pick up speed again. And it was automatic. I looked in the rearview mirror. Right away, and the light was there again, in the same place, at the same distance. Exactly the same as before, as if it had never disappeared. I remember feeling a cold sensation rise through my chest right then. That kind of reaction that hits before you can even think straight. My foot froze slightly on the accelerator, and I just stared at the mirror, trying to understand if it was actually real. There was no way that vehicle could have turned around, taken the same road, come back out, and ended up in the exact same position in such a short time. It didn't make sense, and yet, there it was. At that point, I stopped trying to explain it logically, at least not in the normal way. My body was already reacting differently. I could feel my breathing getting shorter, tighter, and my hands started sweating on the wheel. I sped up again, this time more than before, pushing close to 75 miles per hour, which was already too fast for that road. I just wanted to see any kind of change, anything that would break that pattern. But nothing changed. The light stayed exactly in the same position, as if it were fixed relative to my car. I started feeling a physical discomfort, a kind of pressure in my chest, not pain, but tension. I looked ahead, then at the mirror, then to the sides, as if expecting to see another car, another reference. But there was nothing. Just me, the road, and that light. I thought about stopping completely, but the idea of being stationary out there with that behind me didn't seem like a good idea. So I tried something else. I began varying my speed more abruptly, accelerating and decelerating quickly, almost like I was trying to throw it off. In any normal situation, a vehicle behind me would react, either getting closer or falling back. But it didn't react. It was like it wasn't subject to the same rules. I started getting the feeling that it wasn't just a distant light. It felt closer than it should be, even while keeping that constant distance. And that made me more and more tense because it wasn't just strange, it was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. After a few more minutes, I noticed something I hadn't really paid attention to before. The intensity of the light never changed. It didn't matter if I went over a slight incline, a dip, or a wide curve. It never got brighter or dimmer. It was always at the exact same level of brightness, as if it wasn't affected by distance or angle at all. That bothered me even more, because any normal headlight would change at least a little under those conditions. I started to feel like the light wasn't exactly back there the way I thought, but somehow aligned with me, like it was following my movement in a more direct way. I know that sounds strange, but that's exactly how it felt in the moment. I also noticed that when I looked straight ahead for a few seconds and then glanced back at the mirror, it felt like the light was already there waiting. There was no slight delay like you'd normally notice when something moves. It was immediate, like nothing had to travel any distance. I tried focusing on the road so I wouldn't keep looking, but my attention kept going back to it. The environment around me felt even emptier now, like everything had become more isolated. Not even distant headlights appeared in the opposite direction, which was already rare. But that night, it felt even quieter. I started feeling a kind of anxiety I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't panic yet, but it was that constant sense that something wasn't right and I had no control over it. That's when I started considering something I normally wouldn't even think about. I leaned forward slightly and adjusted the rearview mirror more carefully, trying to see beyond the light. trying to make out any shape, any outline of a vehicle behind it. But there was nothing. No car, no motorcycle, nothing. Just the light. And that gave me a different kind of bad feeling because it wasn't just strange, it was too empty. I even wondered if it could be some kind of issue with the mirror, so I tilted it more, changed the side angle, checked the door mirrors, and in every case, nothing appeared except that single point of light. I started feeling a constant chill on my arms, even with the AC on, and I realized I wasn't comfortable inside the car anymore, like the space had somehow gotten tighter. I didn't know what else to test. The road stayed the same, long, straight in some stretches, gently curving in others, always surrounded by dark fields. I tried to think about what I would do if that thing really was following me somehow, but there wasn't a clear answer. I couldn't just stop, and there wasn't any town nearby on that stretch. So I focused on reaching a gas station I knew was about 20 minutes ahead, one that was usually open 24 hours. As I thought about that, I looked in the mirror again. And for a split second, very quickly, I had the impression that the light changed. Not its position, but its shape, like it had gotten a little wider, almost as if something had passed in front of it for just an instant. I felt my body lock up immediately like a reflex, and I stared at the mirror trying to see it again. My heart started beating faster, and I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. I waited a few seconds, and the light returned to the same shape as before, a single steady point. But that had been real, I was sure of it. It wasn't a reflection, it wasn't me blinking. I started wondering if there was something between me and the light, something I couldn't fully see, but that had blocked it for a moment. The thought made me far more uncomfortable than before, because until then I was dealing with something strange but simple. Now it felt like there was more there than I could see. I kept driving, trying not to lose control, but I was already very tense. My hands were damp, and I had to wipe one on my pants without taking my eyes too far off the road. I started looking more to the sides too, trying to see if there was any structure, any fence, anything that could give me a more concrete reference of the environment. But it was just darkness. Every few seconds I went back to the mirror, and the light was still there as if nothing had happened. Except now I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong beyond just the light itself. It felt like there was some kind of presence there, something not fully visible but somehow involved in all of it. And the worst part was not knowing what to do with that feeling. After a few more minutes, I started to see in the distance the faint glow of the gas station lights I had in mind. It wasn't very bright, just that yellowish point on the horizon, but it was enough to give me a slight sense of relief. I thought that once I got there with lighting, other people, cameras, that thing would probably just disappear, or at least I'd be able to understand better what was going on. I kept my speed steady, barely blinking, alternating my gaze between the road and the mirror. The light stayed there intact as if it were coming with me all the way to that point. As I got closer to the station, the lighting began to reach the road, and for a moment I thought that finally something would change. But it didn't. Even with more light around, that point stayed exactly the same, revealing nothing beyond itself. When I pulled into the station lot, I made the widest turn I could almost instinctively, just to get a broader view of what was behind me. And in the middle of the maneuver, I looked straight through the back window, not the mirror. And there was absolutely nothing there. No light, no car, no motorcycle, nothing. I finished stopping the car almost in disbelief, engine still running, and sat there for a few seconds staring at the entrance to the highway, waiting to see that light appear again. It didn't. The station was nearly empty. Just a truck parked farther away and the attendant inside the store. I turned off the car, but it took me a while to get out. I just sat there trying to process everything, with that strange feeling still in my body, like something had just stopped, but not really. Story 2. I live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and at that time I was working at a small hospital, doing night shifts as a nursing technician. It was a pretty demanding phase. I was taking a lot of back-to-back shifts because I was trying to save money to move to a new apartment. That specific night, I had left a little later than usual. It was already past 11 when I finally got into my car. I remember feeling tired but not exhausted, just that kind of tired where you want to get home quickly and not talk to anyone. The drive to my house took about 35 minutes, going through a more remote highway with long dark stretches and very little traffic. I was used to it, so I didn't feel unsafe, just a bit isolated sometimes. I got into the car, turned on the AC, tuned the radio to a local station I always listened to, and started driving. The road was practically empty, like it almost always was at that hour. I could see far ahead since there were no other cars, just my headlights lighting up the asphalt and the trees on both sides. The radio was playing some random calm song, and I was kind of on autopilot, just paying attention to the basics. Every now and then I adjusted the volume or the AC because it felt a bit too cold inside the car. Nothing unusual was happening, it was just another normal night driving home from work. I even remember thinking about stopping at a drive-thru, but I gave up on the idea because I just wanted to get home. Everything felt completely normal up to that point, with no sign that anything strange was about to happen. After a few minutes of driving, for no specific reason, the radio started making a faint static noise like when a station briefly loses signal. I assumed it was just interference, which was common in some parts of that road, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But the static didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger, until the music cut out completely. I instinctively reached for the dashboard to adjust the station, thinking I had lost the signal. But before I even turned the knob, the radio changed frequencies on its own. No station name appeared, nothing, just that continuous, uneven, static sound. I frowned, confused, because my car doesn't usually do that kind of thing. I listened for a few seconds, waiting for it to go back to normal. Then, in the middle of that noise, I started to hear something different. At first, it sounded like just another distortion, like when a distant voice accidentally comes through a frequency. But slowly, it became clearer. It was a male voice. Low, unhurried, speaking in a strange way, like it was very close to the microphone. I remember going completely still for a second, just listening. The voice said something about a car on the road, and then described mine exactly. The color, the model, even commented that it looked too clean for this time of night. I immediately felt a cold sensation run through my body, because there was no way that was a coincidence. I instinctively looked around, down the road to the sides, but there was no one, just me. In that moment, my body reacted before I could even think clearly. My hand froze mid-air near the radio, and I started quickly scanning the sides of the road, then the rear-view mirror. There were no cars behind me, no headlights, nothing. The road was still empty, dark, exactly as before. The voice kept talking in the same calm, almost indifferent tone. It said the name of the road I was on. Perfectly correct, no mistake. That gave me a really bad feeling because it wasn't something generic like some road. It was too specific. I felt a tightness in my stomach, and my first instinct was to turn off the radio. I pressed the button, and nothing happened. The sound continued. I tried again, this time turning the knob, trying to switch stations manually. But the display didn't respond, as if it were stuck on that frequency. The voice paused briefly, just long enough for me to notice the silence between words, and then spoke again. It said something like, "You're alone." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I felt chills run up my arms even with the AC on. My breathing became shorter, and I started gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. In my head, I tried to find some explanation. Anything logical. Maybe someone with a ham radio, some kind of interference. But none of that explained how the person knew exactly where I was and what car I was driving. I kept driving, trying to stay calm, but I was fully alert now. My eyes kept moving between the road and the rearview mirror, waiting to see any car appear, any sign that someone might actually be close enough to see me. But everything remained empty. The voice went silent for a few seconds, just the static in the background, and in a way that was worse because I was waiting for it to come back at any moment. My heart was beating faster now, and I noticed I was gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers were starting to stiffen. I thought about grabbing my phone, calling someone, but at the same time I didn't want to take my attention off the road even for a second. Then the voice came back, this time more direct. It described my car again, repeated the color, the model, and then said exactly which stretch of road I was on at that moment, including a landmark I had passed just seconds earlier. That made my stomach drop for real, because there was no way it was outdated information. It was real time. I felt a pressure in my chest, and for a moment I seriously considered pulling over to figure out what was going on. That's when the voice spoke for the last time without changing its tone. "Don't stop." That was it, no explanation, nothing before or after. Just that. I froze for a few seconds, processing it. The phrase kept repeating in my head as I drove. "Don't stop." It wasn't threatening in tone, but the way it was said, it sounded more like a warning than anything else. I started paying even closer attention to the road ahead, trying to spot anything unusual. My breathing was faster now, and I felt a constant unease in my body, like something was about to happen. I considered ignoring it completely and continuing as if it were just strange interference. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me somehow, and that made me more tense with every second. Shortly after that, I saw a car parked on the shoulder up ahead. Its lights were off, which was already strange. As I got closer, I could see a person outside near the driver's door, waving both arms in a desperate way. My first instinct was to slow down. It was automatic. Someone asking for help at that hour on that road, I would always stop. I started easing off the gas, and my foot even lightly touched the brake. But at that exact moment, without even thinking, that phrase came back into my head. Don't stop. It was almost like a reflex. I froze for a second, staring straight ahead, and I drove past without stopping. It wasn't a natural decision, it felt forced. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to focus too much on the person, but as my car passed theirs, I couldn't help glancing to the side for a second. The lighting there was very dim, just the edge of my headlights partially illuminating the scene. I saw the person still waving, but something felt off about it. The movement didn't look coordinated, it was exaggerated, almost unnatural, like they were trying too hard to get attention. And what bothered me the most was that I couldn't clearly see their face. Not just because it was dark, but because it seemed out of focus, like I couldn't fix the image. It was just a second, but enough to make me even more uncomfortable. As soon as I passed, my instinct was to check the rearview mirror. I needed to confirm that it was just a normal person asking for help. But when I looked, the car was there, but the person wasn't. They were simply no longer outside. I even slowed down slightly without realizing it, trying to understand if they had crouched, gotten into the car, or moved out of view. But it didn't make sense for them to disappear that quickly. The road behind me was still lit enough by my taillights for me to see at least some movement, and there was nothing. That made my entire body go on high alert again, much more than before. I sped up again without even noticing, like my body was trying to get away as fast as possible. My breathing was uneven now, and I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I kept looking in the mirror for a few seconds, trying to spot any sign of that person, but there was nothing. Just the parked car, completely dark, getting smaller as I moved away. I started wondering if I had made a mistake, if that really was someone who needed help. But at the same time, that strange feeling wouldn't leave me. The way the person moved, the fact that they disappeared so fast, none of it felt normal. That's when I noticed something else. There was no sound coming from the radio anymore. No static, no voice, nothing. I glanced at the dashboard, and the radio seemed to be working normally again, as if it had never glitched. The station had gone back to the same music I was listening to before, like nothing had happened. That confused me even more because it felt like everything that had just happened was isolated, like it only existed in that moment. I stared at the dashboard for a few seconds, then brought my focus back to the road, trying to anchor myself to something real. But my mind kept going back to the voice. I kept driving for a few more minutes, trying to calm down, but my body was still tense. I started paying attention to simple things around me just to ground myself. The passing signs, the sound of the tires on the asphalt, the air blowing through the vents. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. But the feeling didn't go away. It was like something was still out of place, even if I couldn't point to exactly what. I looked in the rearview mirror one more time, expecting to see an empty road. And that's when I felt that same cold sensation again, because far behind me in the distance there was a car coming. But that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was that as I kept watching, that car seemed to stay at exactly the same distance, just like what had happened before with that light. I couldn't make out many details yet, just the headlights, but there was something familiar about it. I blinked a few times, trying to focus better, and for a second I had the impression that only one of the headlights was on. My heart started racing again immediately. I looked forward for a few seconds, trying not to jump to conclusions. But when I looked back at the mirror, the feeling was still there. It was behind me. Again. I felt a tight pressure in my chest at that moment, like everything had gone back to the beginning, but worse. My first instinct was to convince myself it was just another car, something normal. But my own mind wasn't accepting that anymore. I started slightly varying my speed without even realizing it, just to see if it would react. But just like before, it didn't seem to change much. The distance stayed almost exactly the same. I kept my eyes on the road for a few seconds, trying not to panic, but every time I looked in the mirror, that impression that only one headlight was on became clearer. I didn't want to stare at it for too long, but at the same time I couldn't help it. It was like I needed to confirm what I was seeing, even knowing it would only make things worse. And the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. There wasn't that slight vibration you'd expect from a normal moving car. It looked too stable. That's when almost instinctively I remembered the voice, the way it spoke to me, and most importantly, the last thing it said, "Don't stop." In that moment, it stopped feeling just strange and started feeling like a real warning. And the worst part was realizing that if I had stopped back there, I might not even be here to think about it. Story 3. My girlfriend and I were driving through rural Nevada, heading back from visiting family in Utah. It was a long trip, and we decided to do most of it at night to avoid traffic and the intense daytime heat. It must have been around 1 a.m. when this happened. I'd been driving for a few hours and the road was practically an endless straight line, surrounded by nothing but dark desert. We had already passed through several stretches without any sign of civilization, so we were kind of used to that emptiness. Still, the gas tank was getting close to empty, and I started paying attention to any station that might appear. After a while, we saw a gas station lit up ahead on the road. It was actually a relief because there had been nothing for miles. The lights were strong enough to stand out in the total darkness around. I signaled and pulled into the lot without thinking much about it. The place looked old, not exactly abandoned, but not well maintained either. The pumps were working, at least it seemed that way, and there was a small store next to them with the lights on, but no one visible inside. I parked next to one of the pumps, turned off the car, and for a moment there was a strange silence there, different from what it had been inside the car. I got out and immediately felt the dry, cold night air. That kind of desert cold that feels more intense when you step out of a closed space. My girlfriend stayed inside at first on her phone while I went to the pump. There was no one around, no sound of movement from the store, not even the usual hum of a refrigerator or a door opening. It was all very quiet. I picked up the nozzle, selected the fuel type, and started pumping normally. The pump worked without any issues, which made me feel a bit more at ease, like it proved the place was legitimate. Even so, I kept glancing around, expecting someone to show up. After a few seconds, my girlfriend opened the car door and got out too. She came over and commented that the place felt kind of strange, too quiet. I agreed, but tried to downplay it, saying it was probably just because it was late and there wasn't any traffic. While we were talking, I looked over the top of the car across the lot, and that's when I realized we weren't alone there. On the other side of the station, a bit away from the main pumps, there was a car parked. Its lights were off, but you could clearly make out its shape because of the station lighting. And inside it, there was someone sitting. At first, I thought it was just another person stopped there, maybe resting or waiting. But there was something about the way that person was sitting that made me uncomfortable. They weren't moving, not adjusting the seat, not using a phone, nothing. Completely still, facing in our direction. I tried to focus better, but the lighting didn't reach that area well, so I could only see the silhouette, no face, no details. Even so, it was clear they were looking at us. I stared for a few seconds without saying anything, until my girlfriend noticed I had stopped paying attention and asked what was wrong. I just slightly tilted my head toward the car. She looked too, and I could tell from her expression right away that she felt the same thing I did. It wasn't just in my head. She went quiet for a moment and then said softly that it was strange. We both stood there, trying to act normal but clearly uncomfortable. I looked back at the pump, trying to focus on finishing quickly, but my attention kept going back to that car. At no point did the person move. Not when we looked directly. Not when my girlfriend took a few steps back. It was like they were just watching, without any reaction. When the tank finally filled, I pulled the nozzle out quickly, not even waiting calmly for the final click, and put it back. I already had that feeling of wanting to leave as soon as possible. I looked around one more time, especially toward the store, wondering if it was worth going in to pay, but I still didn't see anyone inside. The lights were on, but it looked completely empty. That didn't make much sense, but at the same time, I didn't want to step away from the car even for a second. My girlfriend had already gone back to the passenger seat and closed the door, clearly uneasy. I got in, started the engine, and before leaving, I looked again toward the other side of the station. The person was still there. Same position, no movement. At that point, it was bothering me more directly because it wasn't just strange. It felt like they were waiting for us to do something. I put the car in gear and started driving out of the lot, trying not to look too rushed. When I turned toward the exit, my headlights briefly illuminated that area better, and I had the impression that the person was leaning slightly forward compared to before, but I couldn't make out the face. As soon as we got back on the road, I felt an immediate sense of relief, even without knowing exactly why. It was like leaving a place where something wasn't right, even if you couldn't pinpoint what. I sped up more than usual, wanting to put distance between us and that station as quickly as possible. My girlfriend stayed quiet for a few seconds, looking out the side window, then said she didn't like that place. I agreed immediately. We tried to talk about something else, any random topic just to break the mood, but it didn't last long. That feeling was still there, lingering underneath. After a few minutes, she picked up her phone and opened the GPS again, probably to check how much of the trip was left. That's when she frowned and kept staring at the screen longer than usual. I asked what was wrong, still watching the road. She said something was strange, that the map didn't show any gas station in that area where we had stopped. I thought maybe she had zoomed out too much or something, so I asked her to check again. She zoomed in, went back a few miles, checked the entire stretch of road, and nothing. There was absolutely nothing there. At that moment, I felt a strange discomfort, not from a direct scare, but from something that simply didn't make sense. I asked her to go back even further on the map to see if any kind of old location showed up, any marking that could explain it. But there was nothing. Just the road cutting through the middle of nowhere with no establishments, no indication that a station existed there. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a place not registered, something small or older. But at the same time, that didn't explain the condition of the station, the lights, the working pumps. It didn't look abandoned. It looked active. My girlfriend started getting more tense too. I could tell by the way she was holding her phone too tightly. She said it didn't make any sense that a functioning gas station doesn't just not show up on the map. I agreed, but tried to stay calm, saying it could just be an app error or outdated data. But even as I said it, I wasn't convinced. The image of that car, that person watching us, wouldn't leave my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt like we had stopped at a place that shouldn't have been there. After a few minutes in silence, almost at the same time, we both looked at the rearview mirror. It wasn't planned, it was automatic, like we were thinking the same thing. I expected to see the station lights getting smaller in the distance like normal. But there were no lights. Nothing. The road behind us was completely dark, just like it had been before we arrived there. I even slowed down a bit without realizing it, trying to give myself more time to see better. But nothing appeared. Not even that distant glow you usually see when leaving a lit place. It was as if the station had never existed. My girlfriend said quietly that it wasn't possible, and I could hear in her voice that it wasn't just confusion, it was fear. I looked again, adjusted the mirror slightly, tried to catch any detail, but everything was still dark. That gave me a really bad feeling, because there was no logical explanation for it to disappear that quickly. We had left less than 2 minutes earlier. There wasn't enough time for everything to shut down, even if they wanted to. I sped up again, this time without thinking, just wanting to get away as fast as possible. And as I drove, one thing wouldn't leave my mind. That person in the car, because if the station wasn't there anymore, then that shouldn't have been either. Story 4. I live near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and at that time I was working as a night delivery driver for a local app. It was the kind of job I took mostly to make some extra money, so I accepted deliveries that were farther out, especially late at night when the pay was better. That night I had already been driving for a few hours, and around 2 a.m., I took one last delivery that brought me to a much more rural area than I was used to. After I finished, I had two options. Go back using a main road, which was longer, or take a shortcut through a 2-lane road that cut straight through a more isolated area. Since I was already tired and wanted to get home quickly, I chose the shortcut. It was a typical road for that region. 2 lanes, no street lighting, trees on both sides. In some stretches there were small clearings, but overall it was pretty enclosed. I was driving at a steady speed with the high beams on since there were no cars coming from the opposite direction. The silence was almost complete, just the sound of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. I remember being kind of on autopilot, thinking about the next day, what I had to take care of. Nothing unusual. I had driven that route a few times before, so I wasn't worried. It was just another empty stretch in the middle of the night. After a few minutes, I started to notice something different ahead, still far away but visible within the reach of my headlights. At first, it looked like a shadow crossing the road, like it could be some object or even a larger animal. Naturally, I took my foot off the gas just as a precaution and approached more carefully. As my headlights reached it more clearly, I could see it was a vehicle stopped, but in a completely wrong position. It was slightly angled, taking up part of both lanes as if it had stopped in the middle of the road without trying to pull over properly. That immediately put me on alert. It wasn't a normal situation. The first thing I thought was an accident. Maybe someone had lost control and ended up stopping like that. But as I got closer, I noticed another detail. The driver's door was open. Not fully wide open, but enough to clearly see it. And there was no one around. No interior light on, no hazard lights, nothing. Just the car, crooked in the middle of the road with the door open and a strange silence around it. I slowed down even more, trying to understand what was going on. I reduced speed to almost a stop, keeping the car moving very slowly, just enough not to be completely stationary there. My first reaction was to look around, trying to see if someone was on the ground asking for help, anything that could explain the situation. But there was nothing visible on the road. The vegetation on both sides was tall enough to block the view deeper inside, so I started paying attention there too, trying to spot any movement. My heart was already beating a little faster, not exactly from fear yet, but from alertness. That didn't look like a normal accident. It felt too arranged in the wrong way. Then I saw something move in the bushes on the right side of the road. It was quick, a low movement like someone shifting position. I froze for a second, trying to focus better. I turned off the high beams and left only the low beams on, maybe trying to see better without as much glare. And then I saw it again, this time more clearly. It wasn't just random movement. It was someone, or something the size of a person. The silhouette was partially hidden among the plants, but I could tell it was crouched or leaning. And it wasn't leaving, it was there. At that moment, my entire body went into real alert mode. It wasn't just attention anymore. It was that clear sense of danger. I immediately looked to the other side of the road, trying to see if there was anyone else, and that's when I noticed a second movement, now on the left side. Farther away but aligned with the stopped car, another silhouette, taller this time, standing partially hidden among the trees. I felt a cold sensation run up my back because that didn't look like a coincidence. The two positions, one on each side of the road and the car blocking the middle, it all started to fit together in a bad way. I didn't wait any longer to try to understand. My foot went straight to the accelerator, but since I was almost stopped, it took a second for the car to respond. In that brief moment, both silhouettes started moving, not walking normally, but coming fast, straight toward the road. I couldn't make out faces, clothes, anything, just movement. That was enough. I turned the wheel sharply, swerving past the stopped car by a narrow margin, almost scraping its rear. My heart was racing, and I focused only on getting out of there as fast as possible, without looking back at that moment. As soon as I passed the car, I pressed hard on the accelerator without thinking twice. The engine responded loudly, and I felt the car pick up speed quickly, too fast for that road. But at that moment, I didn't care at all. My only intention was to create as much distance as possible. Even so, by reflex, I glanced quickly in the rearview mirror, and what I saw only confirmed what I was starting to understand. The two figures had reached the edge of the road right where I had passed. They weren't chasing the car. They were just standing there, watching. I looked away immediately and focused back on the road, but my mind was already racing, trying to process everything. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't someone needing help. It was set up. The car blocking the road, the open door, the people hidden on both sides, and it was meant to make someone stop. I felt a tightness in my chest when that realization became clear, because I had come very close to doing exactly that. If I had fully stopped, if I'd gotten out of the car, I don't even know what would have happened. And the worst part was realizing how normal it all seemed at first glance. After a few minutes of driving fast, I started to slow down gradually, more out of necessity than desire. My hands were trembling slightly on the wheel, and I noticed my breathing was still uneven. I looked again in the rearview mirror, but this time there was nothing, just the dark road fading behind me. Even so, the sense of alertness didn't go away. It was like my body was still expecting something to happen. I started paying even closer attention to every detail around me, any shadow, any reflection along the sides of the road. I thought about calling the police, but at the same time I didn't even know how to explain it without sounding confused. I didn't have a license plate, didn't have a clear description of the people, just that brief scene. Still, it stayed in my mind, because the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It didn't seem improvised. The position of the car, the way they were hidden, the timing of their movement, it felt repeated, planned. And that was what bothered me the most afterward. It wasn't just what happened to me. It was the idea that it could happen to anyone else on that same road. Story 5. I live near Montgomery, Alabama, and at that time I was working at a dental clinic in a town a bit farther away, so I had to drive every day along a long and very isolated road. I usually got off earlier, but on that specific day I had to stay later because of an appointment that delayed everything. When I finally left, it was already past 10:30 at night. I remember feeling tired but not sleepy, just wanting to get home as soon as possible. I got into the car, put some low music on the radio, and started my usual drive. It was a 2-lane road with no street lighting for most of it, just a few scattered houses along the way. In the first few minutes, everything was completely normal. There were practically no cars on the road, neither ahead nor behind. I was driving calmly, maintaining a steady speed, paying attention only to the basics. The air inside the car was cool, and I was a bit distracted thinking about the day, about what I still had to do when I got home. It was the kind of route I knew well, so I didn't feel unsafe at all. Just another normal night coming back from work. Nothing unusual happening. After a while, I glanced at the rearview mirror more out of habit than necessity, and saw a car coming up behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. That happens, even on a road with little traffic. But within a few seconds, I realized it was approaching too fast. The headlights were high, strong, completely lighting up the inside of my car through the mirror. That started to bother me, so I adjusted the rearview mirror to reduce the glare. Even so, it was clear that it was tailing me much closer than normal for that kind of road. I thought maybe the driver wanted to pass, so I eased off the gas a bit and stayed more to the right side of the lane, giving space. But the car didn't pass. It stayed exactly behind me, at that same short distance, with the high beams still on. That started to make me uncomfortable, because it didn't make sense. If they wanted to pass, they would have already done it. If not, there was no need to stay that close. I started paying more attention, looking at the rearview mirror more often, trying to understand that car's behavior. After a few minutes in that situation, I was clearly uncomfortable. It wasn't just the annoyance of the high beams, it was the strange behavior itself. The car kept exactly the same distance, didn't try to pass, didn't slow down, nothing. It was like it was following me. I started varying my speed slightly just to see if there would be any reaction. I sped up a little, and it sped up too. I slowed down slightly, and it slowed down as well, maintaining that almost fixed distance. That made my stomach tighten in a bad way, because it no longer felt like a coincidence. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it could just be someone distracted or careless, but the feeling didn't match that. I quickly glanced to the sides of the road, trying to see if there was any entrance, anywhere I could pull over if needed, but it was all too dark and empty. The only constant was that car behind me, and it was exactly at that moment that something happened that I wasn't prepared to deal with. Suddenly, without any warning, its lights went off. At that moment, I felt a shock run through my body, like my brain took a second to understand what had just happened. I looked at the rearview mirror immediately, expecting to at least see the outline of the car, but there was nothing. No lights, no reflection, absolutely nothing. Just total darkness behind me. And that was much worse than seeing it close, because before I knew where it was, now I had no idea. My heart started beating much faster, and I felt my hands turn cold on the steering wheel. I kept driving, but my attention was completely split, trying to look ahead while at the same time imagining where that car could be. I started thinking of every possibility at once. Had it turned off, left the road? But none of that made sense because I hadn't seen any turn, any brake lights, any sign of lateral movement. And more importantly, there wasn't enough time. It was too instantaneous. The feeling I had was that it had simply turned off its lights and kept following me, just invisible now. And that sent me into a kind of panic I wasn't expecting, because I knew that in that darkness I wouldn't be able to react if it suddenly got close. I started accelerating almost without realizing it, like an automatic reaction. My foot gradually pressed the accelerator more and more, while I tried to keep control of the car and stay focused on the road. At the same time, I kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, even knowing I wouldn't see anything. It was like an impulse. I needed to confirm, even though there was nothing to confirm. The road behind me remained completely dark, with no sign of light, and that only increased the feeling that it was still there. I just couldn't see it. My breathing got faster, and I started to feel that tightness in my chest that comes with strong anxiety. I tried to keep the car steady, not making any sudden movements because any mistake there could be worse. But my mind wouldn't stop. I kept imagining the car right behind me without headlights, so close that I wouldn't have time to react if it suddenly sped up. And the worst part was that I had no way to confirm it. I had no way of knowing if it was just a few meters behind me, or if it had already gone. That uncertainty was what made me the most nervous. I tried to focus only on the road ahead as a way not to completely panic. I forced myself to take deeper breaths a few times, trying to stay in control, but it was hard to ignore what was happening. I started paying attention to every detail around me. Anything that could give me a reference point, some lit area, a house, any sign that I wasn't completely isolated. But most of the route was still dark with trees and open land on both sides. I felt like I was being watched, even without being able to see anything behind me. After a few minutes, which felt much longer, I finally started to see a lit area up ahead. It wasn't a big town, just a small stretch with a few streetlights and maybe an intersection with another road. That alone gave me some immediate relief. I thought that once I got there with light, I might be able to see if there was a car behind me or at least feel safer. I kept my speed high as I got closer, my heart still racing and that constant feeling that something could happen at any moment. As soon as I entered that lit area, I felt immediate relief, like my body had finally left a constant state of alert. The streetlights illuminated the road well, and for the first time in several minutes I could clearly see everything around me. I didn't wait even a second. I looked straight into the rearview mirror, and that's when my stomach dropped for real, because the car was there, behind me, at the same distance as before, with the headlights on again, as if they had never been turned off. In that moment, I felt an intense cold run through my entire body. There was no way that had happened normally. There was no way it could have kept that exact distance in total darkness without slipping, without getting too close, without disappearing completely. And the worst part was that now, with the lighting, I could see a bit more of the car, but not enough to identify who was inside. The windows seemed too dark, or maybe it was just the way the light hit them. I kept driving without slowing down, my eyes shifting between the road and the rearview mirror. And the feeling that stayed with me after that was just one. It never lost my position, not even for a second. Story 6. My name is Megan. I'm 28 years old and I live in Nashville. This happened to me a few weeks ago while I was driving back from a smaller town in rural Tennessee after visiting a friend. I left in the late afternoon thinking I'd make it back without any problems. But at some point on the road, my GPS suddenly stopped working. The signal dropped completely, and I was already in a more isolated area with few signs and almost no landmarks. I kept driving for a while trying to figure things out, but eventually I realized I had no idea if I was even on the right route anymore. After a few minutes, I saw a small gas station on the side of the road and decided to stop to ask for directions. The place was very simple, with one pump, a small store, and a dirt parking lot. There wasn't much activity, just an older car parked farther away. I parked near the pump, turned off the car, and sat there for a few seconds trying to decide whether to get out or just keep going on my own. Since the signal wasn't coming back at all, I got out of the car with the intention of asking the store clerk for help. As soon as I closed the car door and started walking toward the store, a man appeared from the side of the building. I hadn't even seen him before. He didn't look like an employee, just regular clothes, but he walked straight toward me like he already knew I was going to ask for help. Before I could say anything, he asked if I was lost. I said yes and quickly explained that I had no signal and was trying to get back to the main road. He immediately started explaining the directions, pointing toward the road, but in a very detailed way. At first it seemed helpful. He mentioned a curve, then another gas station ahead, then a specific sign. But he didn't stop. Every time it seemed like he was about to finish, he added another instruction, another detail, another possible turn. I stood there listening, trying to follow along, but it was already starting to feel unnecessarily confusing. I tried to interrupt once, saying I understood enough to try to get back to the main road, but he kept talking as if he hadn't heard me. He started describing alternate routes, side roads, landmarks I probably wouldn't even recognize. The way he spoke didn't feel like someone trying to help in a practical way. It felt like he was intentionally keeping the conversation going, without reaching a clear end. I started to feel that subtle discomfort in my body, that sense that something wasn't right. While he kept talking, I took a small step back, trying to create space so I could move toward my car. But he stepped forward as well, keeping the distance close, not aggressive, but also not allowing me to naturally end the interaction. I began paying more attention to the surroundings, trying to understand the situation. That's when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a car slowly pulling into the parking lot behind mine. The car entered quietly, just rolling in through the dirt entrance and approaching from behind my vehicle. I didn't fully turn my body, but I could follow it through the reflection in the store window. It stopped right behind my car, close enough to make any simple exit maneuver difficult. That gave me an immediate sinking feeling in my stomach. It didn't look like someone arriving normally to get gas because it didn't head toward the pumps. It went straight behind my car. Meanwhile, the man kept talking like nothing was happening. He began repeating parts of the directions, adding even more unnecessary details, mentioning smaller roads that I didn't even remember seeing on the map. It was too much information, and more confusing by the second. I realized I wasn't even paying attention to what he was saying anymore. My mind was focused on the position of that car behind mine, and the way this man wasn't giving me space to leave the conversation. I tried to interrupt again, this time more directly, saying I needed to go because it was getting late. But he kept talking over me in the same tone as if the conversation had just started. That gave me a very clear feeling that he didn't want me to leave yet. My body went fully into alert mode. I started planning in my head how to get back to my car without giving him an opportunity to get closer. I took another step back, this time without trying to hide it, and he stepped forward again, still talking, still pointing toward the road. At that moment, I realized that if I kept trying to be polite, I would stay stuck in that situation. I didn't respond anymore. I just turned my body and walked straight toward my car, completely ignoring what he was saying. As soon as I turned, I heard his voice change slightly, like he realized I was ending the interaction. He said something behind me, still trying to continue the directions, but I didn't look back. I walked faster, almost speeding up, feeling my heart pounding. When I got close to my car, I took a quick look at the vehicle parked behind mine. I couldn't clearly see who was inside, but it didn't look empty. That was enough to increase the urgency even more. I got into my car as fast as I could, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine without even adjusting the seat properly. As I did that, I checked the rearview mirror. The man was still a few steps away, not running but clearly watching me. The car behind me was still there, exactly in the position that made it hard to get out. At that moment, I knew I had to act quickly before either of them got closer. I shifted into reverse without thinking much, even with the car behind partially blocking me. My goal wasn't to make a perfect maneuver, it was just to create enough space to get out. I accelerated harder than usual and turned the wheel sharply, angling the car awkwardly. I heard the tires crunch against the gravel, and for a second I thought I wouldn't make it. But I managed to open up just enough space to slip out through the side. As the car started moving, I glanced quickly at the side mirror and saw the man taking a few steps toward me, but not running. The car behind didn't move immediately, which gave me the few seconds I needed. I accelerated more, pulling back onto the main road without even properly checking for other vehicles. My focus was just to get as far away from that place as possible. I kept accelerating for several minutes without slowing down, trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that gas station. It took a while for my heart to calm down and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see the car behind me show up on the road, but I didn't see anything. The road stayed dark and mostly empty, with only a few distant cars. As I drove, I started processing everything that had happened. The way the man kept talking nonstop, always extending the conversation. the exact moment the other car arrived and stopped behind mine. None of it felt like a coincidence. It felt like a setup to keep me there long enough until I no longer had an easy way out. And if I had stayed there just a few more minutes, trying to be polite, trying to listen until the end, I might not have gotten back into my car in time. After driving for a while, I finally reached an area with better signal and was able to get my GPS working again. I stopped at a larger gas station, well lit with plenty of activity, just to make sure I was somewhere safe before continuing. I stayed inside the car for a few minutes looking around, watching people coming and going normally, trying to bring my mind back to reality. The contrast with the other place was huge. Here, everything felt normal. To this day, what bothers me most isn't just the scare itself, but the way everything happened. There was no direct threat, no aggressive approach. It was all subtle, like a normal conversation. And because of that, it took me a few extra seconds to realize what was happening. And in those seconds, I was basically standing there, vulnerable without even realizing it. I've never stopped at an isolated place to ask for directions since then.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.